All right, everyone. Bernie fever has begun sweeping the country right before the Iowa and New Hampshire voting begins. He may end up with a hard peak as the result of this that'll then wane before the voting happens. It'd be very funny if he just blows his load just about a week too early, and that's, of course, possible. Or he could be peaking when Iowa votes, in which case he probably runs away with it. That could really help him. Yes, Bernie Sanders, in theory, could become the nominee. It's never been impossible. It's just that Joe Biden has been so consistently the front runner. He has the backing of the corporate party apparatus. He has a larger fan base. It's just less excited to vote for him. We're going to have to see, because you could see like a hidden anti-socialist vote or a hidden like Youth for Bernie higher turnout vote that could really screw with people. We need more polling in order to determine that. Within a few days before Iowa and New Hampshire, we'll be able to sort of guesstimate what's going to happen. But keep in mind, it could be wildly different. Remember in 2016, I and a lot of other people guessed that Trump would win in a squeaker in Iowa, and Ted Cruz actually got the state by a fairly comfy margin. This happened in Wisconsin as well. Those two states are weird for some reason. Like, the polling never syncs up with the result. Hell, if Biden's ahead in Iowa polling, he'll probably lose the state. If he's behind, he probably wins it at this point, because the pollsters probably just fudge their numbers on purpose just to troll people, just to skew everyone's pitch. Anyway, the USA Today came out with an article the other day, and they're sort of the first ones to do this, but I have a guess that it'll be more. As Bernie Sanders rises to more prominence, more sane voices within the left, including the USA Today, which is definitely a leftist publication, let's face it, are warning that Bernie Sanders is not really the wagon you should, as Democrats, hitch your horse to. That's true, because Bernie Sanders is almost an octogenarian. He's an old man. He's elderly in the literal sense. Most of the field, while old, is not elderly. He's elderly, and he just had a heart attack. The fact is that Bernie Sanders' health issues could become a major issue in the general election. Now, if you're a partisan Democrat, you probably don't care. You support whoever the nominee is. If you're a Bernie bro, you don't care because you support Bernie Sanders specifically. If you're on the fence, if you're center-left ideologically, if you're kind of a Democrat because your grandpa was a Democrat, but you're not exactly sure because the Democrats keep changing, that could be a problem. And if you're an independent voter like me, looking at the political situation, do I think it would be healthy for the country if Bernie Sanders, who represents the will of some tens of millions of Americans who are very die-hard supporters of him, let's say he gets elected, and then he dies. He croaks a year later, doesn't accomplish any of the things that he's promised. Chaos. All hell breaks loose. Because, dude, trust me, there would be more than a few people claiming that he was assassinated at that point. I think that it would cause a level of social alienation among certain, especially youthful far-left groups, that could cause literal violence. I think it could be a problem. I don't believe he would serve out his full first term. I simply don't believe that. The dude just had a heart attack, and we're not talking, he had some angina. That was the excuse at first. He had a significant heart attack, and he had surgery. That's what happened. When a person who's almost 80 has fucking heart surgery, has a heart attack, that's significant. It's not like, he's 50, he has a heart attack. Okay, well, we give him an aspirin regimen and tell him to limit the cholesterol intake. It's a little bit different from that. He spent several days in the hospital. He had to cancel his first major ad buy in Iowa. If he wins in Iowa, it's likely to be a squeaker anyway. New Hampshire's basically doesn't matter in this election because it's his second home state because it happens to be the twin state, literally, of Vermont. You do realize that Vermont and New Hampshire are basically kissing cousins, right? New Hampshire is just the more gun-friendly, less taxed version of Vermont. Vermont's just the more green, more liberal version of New Hampshire. There's really no fucking difference, dude. If ever there were two states that should just fucking combine into one, it was Vermont and New Hampshire anyway. We probably should still consider doing that. It'd be a swing state, I think. It'd be funny. Yeah, you get that free state movement with the libertarians trying to take it over. I support that movement, by the way, and that's why I think if that happens, then definitely there should be an attempt to fuse the two states together and create a libertarian utopia. Roughly square-shaped with a few miles of oceanic coastline. Be interesting. Getting back on topic, though. Bernie Sanders, old, health problems, but the other problem is this, and I keep trying to point this out, and there's still people that stubbornly, they look the other way when I mention this. To the Bernie fans, his biggest problem is not the label socialism. it can be a problem with certain voters, but then there are some voters who just don't fucking care, and most of them are Democrats, so that's not a big problem with the party loyal. They'll vote for him. He could call himself a communist, and the Dem loyals would vote for him. That's not a problem. It's not just his age. His age is potentially an issue. Trump would definitely exploit it, but not the biggest issue in the world. As we just saw in 2016, Clinton, Trump, two oldest candidates ever, sparring. It was for a while a little bit of a problem. People chuckled about it. Well, you got these two old fogies running for president, but it wasn't a huge thing. And remember, Sanders would be running against a person in their mid-70s, which is Donald Trump. So that sort of puts it to the side. Heart attack. Bernie's partisan fans will just say, well, he's in better shape than Trump. Trump is pudgy, and then they'll leave it at that. Those aren't the main problems. They're all potentially problems. I'll tell you what the major problem with nominating Bernie Sanders is. You've got a good economy. You can dicker about wage growth, inflation, debt. Okay. Complex issues don't matter on the campaign trail. Sloganeering and very simplistic, oversimplified things. That's how you get elected. It's not the way it should work in a perfect society. It doesn't work with intelligent voters, but most voters don't think that deeply. They have 5 minutes to read about politics before they go to work. That's the average voter in the United States. Bernie Sanders, fundamentally, is running on an economic change platform when the economy for most people is going reasonably well. We're not in a recession. Job growth has been fairly strong. Wage growth has been fairly strong. The stock market is well up. Business growth has been sustained for quite some time now. There are no negative economic markers that don't involve the debt, and the debt argument becomes a dead argument because the Democrats and Republicans repeatedly have ignored the problem whenever they're holding power. You didn't hear any Democrat complain about the debt for the entire time that Obama was in office. No Republicans complained about it under Bush, and most of them have stopped complaining about it now under Trump. It's a debt issue. Most of it's domestically held debt anyway. The biggest foreign holder of debt's Japan, not China. People thought we were going to be taken over by China. I used to laugh at that in the fucking 2000s because it sounded exactly like news reports from the 80s. Japan will own the United States soon. Soon we'll be speaking Japanese and they're going to rename New York to Tokyo 2.0. And it never happened, and it never was going to happen. If anything, it shows Chinese weakness, and 10 years down the road you're going to get to see it for yourselves. That's my official prediction. Bernie Sanders is not going to be able to tell voters, hey guys, psst, you want to buy some socialism? Well, the economy is going well. No, socialism takes hold when the economy has a downturn and then you begin blaming the capitalists and then shooting them thereafter. That's how socialism takes control. Well, there's no economic downturn. Saying wage growth hasn't been as high as it should be for middle-class Americans, that's not a winning issue, Bernie. Most of them are at least getting by. They're going to vote for the status quo over someone who's saying they want to radically transform the system, even if you tell them, hey, we'll give you free shit. Especially, here's the other problem. The sub-problem on that, on his economic reform, is unions. Bernie Sanders had been a union darling for a while, but now with his healthcare proposals, he's telling unions, your union-negotiated healthcare package is kaput. Fuck you. You get no choice. Nobody gets any choice. The government will give you healthcare. It'll be prepackaged, and you get what we give you. We make the decisions. You get to, here's your allocation per year, your rationing of healthcare, essentially. Sorry, but the average person doesn't want that, including people who technically benefit by it in the working class. Yeah, you're in the working class. Right now you're paying for private insurance. You'll probably get a subsidy. Yeah, you'll be paying less overall in excess taxes if you're in the lower echelon of the working class, certainly if you're poor. You're making under the median income. Yeah, it makes sense. You know, that's not going to work, though, with the average middle or upper middle class voter. A lot of people, and again, with the boomers disproportionately being the biggest voting bloc because older people tend to vote more anyway, they're going to really lash out at somebody who's proclaiming themselves a socialist. That's just the way that it is. You can say, well, that's an outdated mentality. Socialism's not that bad. Hail Karl Marx. Youth voters don't turn out at the same rate. Bernie Sanders is building essentially a disenfranchised youth revolution sort of movement. Those don't work. We see one happening right now in Iran that those same youths frown upon and say is U.S. imperialism, and it'll probably fail. Just like the hippies failed. Just like all of these other movements failed. Because the youth is very activistic, but they don't have the guns and they don't have the money. That's what it boils down. You can think that that's bad, but keep in mind a lot of the people whipping others into a frenzy for Bernie are millennials that are now entering their 30s. We're not the youth anymore. We're the middle-age voting demographic almost. The oldest millennials and the youngest Gen Xers, that's the solid core middle-aged demographic. You're getting on towards middle age. You're not a teeny bopper anymore, millennials. Guess what? We're moving through, most of you are still moving through your late 20s. Some of us have entered our early 30s, mid-late 30s. Getting on towards 40 years old, getting a little gray hair. Investing in your 401k, selling out to the man and retiring earlier. So, you know, fucking buying your midlife crisis car. That's the millennial voters. By the way, good riddance to us being the youth. We were a shitty youth movement to begin with. Occupy, ooh. Yeah, that didn't totally fucking break down. The wheels on that bus went spinning off into the river real quick. I'm actually slightly ashamed to be a millennial. I think I should have been born 10 years earlier or 10 years later, ultimately, with my particular political beliefs and finesse in the world. I feel disenfranchised by my own generation and always consistently think higher of people that are a decade older or younger. They seem to make more sense than people in my particular age bracket. I'm squarely in the middle of the millennials. I'm a core millennial. I'm going to be turning 32 fairly soon. I'm not old, but I'm not a teenager. I'm not college aged anymore. Fucking get over it, by the way, millennials. Yeah, mortality is a thing. It's going to be pretty funny. Watching these people fail at a shubba before they die is going to really trip my trigger. Bernie Sanders, though, it's funny that the man leading the youth revolution is almost 80 years old. This is like the face of far leftism. It's an antiquated mid-19th century ideology anyway. Let it die. Let it go and be in the dustbin of history with the other failed ideologies. You should brush it aside and get rid of it permanently. Socialism is a cancer, and so is Bernie Sanders. And I hate the fact that if he becomes nominee, he's going to make an embarrassment of my state regardless of the outcome of the election. It'll be an embarrassing regime, or it'll be an embarrassing failure of a campaign, the latter being, in my opinion, considerably more likely. For all of the bluster and bravado of Bernie's fans, you represent a minority of the Democrats. You represent a small minority of the Democrats. Bernie Sanders has never hit 30% in a poll. Biden does that every other week. Keep that in mind. That's about all. Peace out.